Thank you all for being here. We are extremely happy to have you at our library. And we are also extremely thankful to Olga, who once again will make us enjoy listening to her on any topic, but this one in particular on literature. It's an honor to have you here. It's a pleasure, and I just want to thank you for that. I'm going to make this very short because there's so much to be said about the topic we are going to be discussing today that it's really not necessary for me to go long on words. Toni Morrison, just for those of you who might not know Professor Olga Liberti, she was a teacher of literature in her days, but she's a lover of books, and she enlightens us with her knowledge of literature every time we talk. So that's why we are very happy to have her here. And she's going to be talking about one of the writers who have delved into the topic, this pressing topic of racism and black literature, and who is Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison is an American black literature writer, and she grew up in the American Midwest in a family that possessed an intense love and appreciation of black culture. Storytelling, songs, and folk tales were a deeply formative part of her childhood. She attended Howard University and Cornell University, and after teaching at Texas Southern University for 2 years, she taught at Howard from 1957 to 1964. In 1965, Morrison became a fiction editor at Random House, where she worked for a number of years. And in 1984, she began teaching writing at the State University of New York at Albany, which she left in 1989 to join the faculty of Princeton University. She retired in 2006. And amongst the things that she has left with her work, I just want to share with you a quote, actually two quotes, one that has gone above, I've been thinking and kind of, it has been revolving in my mind for some time, which is, we die, and that may be the meaning of life, but we do language, and that may be the measure of our lives. Isn't it synthetic and beautiful? And then the next quote, which it links with the topic Olga will be discussing with us today, is, in this country, American means white. Everybody else has to hyphenate. That's all. Thank you. We'll just enjoy Olga now.
Well, good evening to begin with. And two personal comments. I think that it's been about, the last time I spoke English publicly may have been about 3 years ago. So if there is any fault, especially in my pronunciation, bear with me. And the other personal comment is that I am not used to discussing literary texts with audiences that have not read the texts. So I try to do my best, I will try to do my best so that all of you understand what I'm talking about. All right, bueno, to begin with, as you see, the title of the talk is Racism and Toni Morrison. As you have heard, Toni Morrison was an American black writer. For me, she is still an American black writer because she is still living through her text, though she died about 3 years ago, I think, more or less. And she got the Nobel Prize in 1993, and she died in 2019, I think. Bueno. as she is a black writer, or she was a black writer, her experience is the black American experience. And of course, this black American experience begins with the slavery, continues with discrimination, and even nowadays is still present through, no, it continues with segregation, which is still worse, and then discrimination, which has not disappeared, neither in the United States nor anywhere else. I would like to refer to the topic of racism by reminding you of certain events that have taken place recently, and that have to do, because they show that racism is still strong, well, and in full swing. One was the murder of George Floyd that took place in May 2020. No? Remember this, because the piece of news went all over the world, and also we have seen and read and listened or heard about this information. And a police officer pressed the back of his neck with his knee for almost 10 minutes. And the sentence that the words that he pronounced 2 or 3 times were "I can't breathe." So they became famous. Luckily, this time, the police officer was sentenced to 22 years prison. But there have been others. I'm not going to very far in time, very much not into the past, but into the recent years. But I will refer only to one of those cases, which was the killing of a young boy, 17 years old, who was killed in, I think, February 2012, and the police officer was acquitted, which was quite usual. That's why I say that luckily the one that killed George Floyd was sentenced to prison, because there have been many cases in which the policemen were given administrative leave, or they were not accused, or they were acquitted. In this case, the acquittal that followed the killing of this boy gave origin to the famous movement Black Lives Matter. That's why I mentioned it. These are individual murders, murders of individual persons. But one feature that is, and you know this, one feature that is recurrent in the American social scene is mass murders. Of all the enormous number of mass murders, I will refer only to the one that took place in May this year in Buffalo, when a young man, 18 years old, killed 10 persons and wounded 3 more persons. The attack took place in a supermarket in Buffalo, and it was this supermarket is placed in the district in which the major part of the population are black citizens. What is interesting is that behind this mass assassination, this young man, who admitted or who described himself as a white supremacist, left a manifesto, a very long manifesto. And this manifesto is based on a theory that is becoming quite popular nowadays. I don't know whether you have heard of it. It's the theory of the Great Replacement. The founder, let's say, or the one who originated the theory is a French philosopher of the extreme right, whose name is Renaud Camus. Camus, like the great writer Camus. I suppose that they have nothing to do, at least in politics, there's no relationship between them. This man, Camus, maintains that the supremacy of the white race is the best, in the sense that it is the most intelligent, the one that has developed the best culture of all, the most beautiful, etc., etc. It's the most. No? And he accuses liberals, liberals in the sense that it is used in English, not in the sense we use it, no, not with a reference to economics, but in reference to politics. That is, liberals are those who are not conservatives. That would be the difference. And he accuses the liberals, especially in Europe, of destroying the white race. How? By means of allowing interracial marriages and uncontrolled migration. That's another one, no? Immigration. And he says that this is followed by other measures like allowing these people to vote, giving them the right to vote, and the other one is accepting the representation of these people in legislative bodies. According to some information coming especially from British newspapers like The Guardian, 1 out of 3 Americans believe in this theory, adhere to this theory. And there is one show on Fox News, of course, it must be Fox, no? Fox News, with about 5 million viewers, in which the person who conducts this show is constantly propagating or spreading this theory of the great replacement or the great substitution. So that's really, we are in danger when these ideas spread. There are other events that call our attention to this, to the presence of racism, to the permanent presence of racism, which perhaps are not so, do not call our attention because they are not so cruel as killings or assassinations, but they are very interesting to take into account. This is something I read in The Guardian last month. No? September 2022, a month ago. In Texas, a group of educators proposed to the State Board of Education to replace the word slavery with in the curriculum of social sciences with the expression involuntary relocation. Think about it and tell me if there is any similarity between slavery and involuntary relocation. It reminds me of the expression that was used during the war of Iraq, collateral damage instead of civilian dead or civilian killed. Last year, Texas passed a law in which it is that prohibits educators to use in social studies to discuss certain topics that may make some students uncomfortable. Now, what topics are there? Sex or politics or religion or slavery, which is history, no? Slavery and its equals. So this is a law that is enforced. And in other states like Florida, New Hampshire, and others, they recast all the references to slavery and its legacy as critical race theory. And it is, we must be careful when we speak of critical theory, because if it is critical, it always means two sides. And at least, in my opinion, I want to speak the truth, let's say, that there can't be two sides when we discuss slavery. Slavery is wrong. Slavery is, from a religious point of view, it is a sin. And from a legal point of view, it is a crime. There are not two sides as to conform a critical theory about slavery. Well, in one of the articles in The Guardian, somebody said, the old values are desperate to hold on. And I remember much older saying, no, only the truth will set you free. And this is St. John in his gospel. To round off this introduction, the perversion of slavery is still strong, no? It's still alive. And in no way can a black writer escape this heritage. That's why a black writer writes about racial conflicts. Of course, they can do so in different ways. And what is interesting, especially about Toni Morrison, is the different ways in which she uses the topic or she deals with the topic. No? Because it's I will say something else when I discuss each of the novels, but she is different. And I organize the novels in chronological order, but not in the chronological order in which they were written, but in chronological order according to the time setting of each novel. The first one, you will see some pieces here, no? The first one is Beloved, in which what she discusses is that it is forbidden to forget. That would be the topic of the novel. In Jazz, she discusses the everlasting scars or marks or wounds of slavery, although slavery apparently has been left behind. In The Blue Sky, she discusses internalized racism. And in Song of Solomon, she inquires into the two topics, identity and race, and racism. The last one in my list is Star Baby, in which she deals with the clashing views as regards the social conflict. We will see something else later. Bueno, and now the novels. The first one is Beloved. Beloved is based on a true episode. The time of the story is more or less the 1870s or thereabouts. No, a bit more. Bueno, more or less. 70, 71. But the true episode that inspired the story took place in 1856. In 1856, a slave escaped from the south to the north. Remember that there was a line, the Mason-Dixon line, that divided the free states from the states, slave states, and also the River Ohio was part of this limit between the north and south. She escaped, like so many other slaves. She escaped with her family. At that moment, two young boys and two little girls. One 2 years old and the other was a baby, breastfeeding. And in those days, the federal government had passed a law that forced or made the federal government responsible for catching again all slaves that it is the name is the fugitive slave laws. All slaves that had escaped from the south, even if they were in free territory, should be caught and sent back. And so one of the jobs in those days was slave hunter. This woman, this Margaret Garner, I'm referring to the true episode, she was so desperate. She enjoyed freedom for about a month. When the hunters came, she was so desperate that she became mad, or she was driven mad almost. She was in a frenzy, and she wanted to kill all her children so that they were not returned to slavery. And she was caught. She was forced to well, she was not allowed to do so, not even by her family. but she killed one of her children. It was the 2-year-old baby. The story begins some years later, I said, with the characters that have already lived that experience. The woman character has a different name, and there are two important characters. One is Sidi, the female character, and the other is Paul D, who they have met in the South because they were slaves in the same plantation. Well, the topic is this episode, this historical episode, gives origin to the story, but the story centers on it's not possible. We should not forget. We must not forget episodes like this because they are part of our past, and we must never forget it. And she uses certain words. For instance, instead of not forget, she says to disremember. No, we are not allowed to disremember because this is part of our past. One way or the other, one way not to forget is to talk about this, though the characters find it very difficult. Imagine all the cruelties, all the punishment, all the tortures that they had undergone while were the slaves. It's very difficult to talk about that. You want to get rid of those memories. And at the same time, we know, and this would be psychoanalysis, we know that when there is something that is a weight weighs on our conscience, we must speak about it. We must liberate ourselves by speaking about it. There are many passages. I remember only one in which the male character tells her of some atrocity he witnessed while he was in the plantation, and she says, "What did you say?" "Nothing." "How come that you didn't say anything?" "I couldn't. I had the bit in my mouth." The bit. No? You know what a bit is, el freno. And so she understood why. The novel says something, let me see. No medicine was good enough to alleviate the outrage the mouth kept in its memory, because it is also physical memory. And at the same time, while she encourages him to tell her about the episode, and at the same time she thinks that her brain and her heart have no more room for these atrocities, no? And she says something that is really, it is far from our experience, of course, no? It's really moving. She says, "How sweet it would be to go mad like so many others." So being mad, you do not understand, you don't see, you don't remember. It's terrible. Bueno, another important characteristic of the novel, one is this, not to forget the past, and another one is the presence of a ghost. A ghost that Sidi understands that it is the ghost of the baby she killed. She called the baby beloved, because this is the word that she had engraved on the baby's tombstone. The ghost sometimes Sidi thinks of it as a baby, and then as a grown-up girl appears, an adolescent appears, more or less the same her daughter has, Denver. Her daughter is, Denver. Then this character, which is ambivalent, we don't know exactly whether she is a baby, whether it is this girl who has lost her memory, well, no. But it serves Morrison to tell us through this character precisely certain things that otherwise she wouldn't be allowed because the character had not lived. For instance, there is a very lyrical passage in which this girl, beloved, remembers the Middle Passage. And the Middle Passage is the coming of the slaves from Africa to America. And I don't know whether you have ever seen a picture or a drawing of the slave ships because it's terrible. They were chained. There was no room in the hold, and they were chained one to the other. Most of the time, one on top of the other. They had no fresh air, no fresh water, no fresh food. They couldn't move. They were constantly lying on their own filth. So it's terrible. And the number of people who died, no, in those conditions. But lyrically, she, through this character that is so ambivalent, she takes us back to the original of all this suffering, of this that Paul D cannot tell, or CD cannot listen to, because it is too, it's a suffering that is very difficult to put up with. Bueno, and after this passage, and you have here, I think it is this in Beloved, yes, after this passage, the life in the plantation. And life in the plantation, that means this, no? What Baby Sachs says. Or rather, she does not say, it is the text that says through Baby Sachs. Anybody Baby Sachs knew, let alone loved, who hadn't run off or been hanged, got rented out, loaned out, bought up, brought back, stored up, mortgaged, won, stolen, or seized. Like goods. Like they could be sold, bought, or whatever. They were cattle. Bueno, and this is a story that she manages to tell, though it is a story in her words, that it is not a story to pass on, because it is very difficult to hear it or to read about it. I think, this is my personal view, that her success lies in what she herself says, no? That she has resorted to what history tells between lines. And she adds, that is, that intersection where an institution becomes personal, where the historical becomes people with names. I think that this is her success. She tells this story, which is so difficult to listen to, by means of these characters who have a name. Bueno, of the many topics in the novel, because she deals with plenty of topics, but I have chosen slavery precisely because the other novels will hinge on this topic, of the topic of slavery. Whatever the troubles that the fictional characters may have, the starting point is always the appalling experience of slavery. Bueno, we leave slavery for a while behind. I'm not going to mention, but you'll see how she manages to keep our mind on it, no? Especially if we read the novels one after the other. Jazz, the time setting of jazz is the 1920s. That is the roaring 20s in the States, the golden age, los años locos en castellano. It has a very violent beginning because the central characters are Joe and Violet. They are a married couple, about 50 or 50-odd years old. And Joe, has shot and wounded his lover, who is a girl 18 years old. Finally, the girl dies. Violet, Joe's wife, goes to the church where the funeral is taking place, and with a knife, and she wants to cut the face of the girl. So you see, this is the first paragraph. You see how violent the first paragraph is. And from this violence, the story unfolds through the whys, no? All the whys that we may ask, and trying to answer, to find the becauses, no? Of all these whys. What we learn as we proceed reading the story is that Violet and Joe belong to that wave of black people, black people who came from the south to the north. A few years after the emancipation, the Civil War ended in 1865. The emancipation, the proclamation of emancipation, took place in 1863 by means of executive order. That is, it was not a law. The executive order is un decreto, what we call perhaps decreto de necesidad y urgencia. Bueno, at the time of the Civil War, they were in the north. They were only 8% of black of the population were black. Some years later, especially at the beginning of the 20th century, they were already 40%, no, of the black population living in the north. They had escaped violence and poverty. They had escaped the Jim Crow laws that were passed in 1865, and though they fall into disuse, they were still in force in 1968. 100 years of these laws that discriminated blacks. The South never accepted that the blacks were no longer slaves, and so they couldn't. They were not allowed to vote, though they had the right to vote by means of, according to the federal government. They couldn't vote. They couldn't get jobs. They were persecuted in all ways. They were accused of any minor offense as if it were a big, very serious crime. And the judges were always white, not only white veterans. Imagine, no? White veterans. And it is that 1865 is precisely the year in which the KKK is founded, no? The Ku Klux Klan. And it was founded as a club for veterans, again, white veterans, Confederate veterans. And so they did what they wanted indeed. They respected no law. But I will not go into that. Bueno, the burden of slavery and the burden of segregation, especially, and discrimination, came with all those blacks that escaped to the north, and it stayed with them. At the beginning, we understand that when we see Joe and Violet, when they come to New York, they are happy. They seem to have left the past behind, but it is not true. The past manages to reappear in the present. So, as we proceed, as we continue reading the story, we learn that Violet, who regrets now that not being a mother, has refused, being very young, to get pregnant. She promised herself that she would never have children because her mother had gone mad. That is, slavery had made her mother had driven her mother mad. And so she fears that the same might happen to her or to her children. So she doesn't want children. And Joe has never known his mother. Joe's mother was mad already before. When she got pregnant, she was called wild because she lived in the wilderness. During all his childhood and part of his adolescence, Joe tried to make contact with her. He wanted to see her, to touch her hand, but he never could. The most that he could do was to hear her voice sometimes or her laughter, but he never saw her. So she is childless and he is motherless. The origin of this problem is slavery, because they had been a slave. They had been in plantations in the South. So these are consequences of slavery. Slavery is not mentioned. We simply learn what has happened to these characters. Bueno. And we learn also about historical events, not only about this, the events in the lives of the characters. For instance, we learn of the 1917 East St. Louis riots. There was white workers against black workers because, of course, the factory owners hired black workers with very low salaries. As a consequence of these riots, there was a march of 10,000 blacks down or along Fifth Avenue in New York, in condemnation of the riot in which a white mob beat to death, shot, lynched, and burned black workers. So one of the characters in the story says, I don't know exactly what started the riot. Could have been that party, he said, where they sent out invitations to whites to come see a colored man burned alive. Thousands of whites turned up. This is the experience. One. So the use of real incidents and facts are no mere additions, because what we understand is that these incidents have made the characters who they are and what they are. Bueno, the title is not capricious. Bueno, there's nothing in Toni Morrison is capricious or gratuitous. Because indeed, the novel is structured, I would say very few things about the structure, no? I'm not going into literature, really. The novel is structured like a jazz score, because there are several characters who have important stories to tell. They act as the solos of the instruments in jazz. And there are repetitions, like the refrains or the riffs in jazz. And so there is a constant flow in which the characters, or the stories of the characters intersect, interact. Sometimes the result is dissonant, and most of the time it is harmonious. Well, and you have one short passage here which has the rhythm of blues. Bluesman, black and bluesman, black therefore blue man. Everybody knows your name. Where did she go and why, man? So lonesome and I could die, man. Everybody knows your name. And you know that blue means sad, but it also means bruised. Moretones. And I don't know, but I suppose that some of you may remember Louis Armstrong singing, "What did I do to be so black and blue?" Well, yes. Then The Blue Sky. The Blue Sky is the first novel that written by Toni Morrison. And so far, all the literature written by black writers, which may be excellent literature, but the central topic was always the confrontation between whites and blacks. They are permanent. They are characters. There are white characters and black characters who confront in all the novels. She, for the first time, decides to remain within the black community and to analyze racism within the black community. There are, of course, there are white characters, but they are in what I would say is the sort of the outskirts of the novel. Of course, there are white characters, because without them, or with them, all these problems originate. No, the conflict originates. And there are all sorts of skin colors. There are niggers, called niggers by blacks themselves, poor blacks, like the family of the narrator of the story, middle class colored, and rich high yellow. Mm? All of them are black, but with different shades of blackness, let's say. The time is 1941, and the place is Lorain, Ohio, which is the hometown of Toni Morrison. They are in a very poor community, still suffering the consequences of the Great Depression. That is, the black men work in the coal mines. Their families usually pick up pieces of coal to use as fuel or to sell also. And the characters are two sisters, Claudia and Frida, they are 12 and 13 years old, and Peccola. Peccola is a very black girl, very black, and so in this order of shades, she is very black, and she is more or less the same age. The narrator of the story is Claudia, but an adult Claudia. She tells the story some years later. In a very short way, Peccola, who is the central character indeed, has a fervent wish for blue eyes. Why does she want blue eyes? Because she understands that if she has blue eyes, everybody will see her beautiful. She will be beautiful in the eyes of everybody. And because through blue eyes, she will see the world beautiful. Because blue eyes, all that blue eyes see are beautiful things. Bueno, she does not get blue eyes, of course. She is raped by her father when he's drunk, and the baby dies, and she finally goes mad. And whiteness, I said at the beginning that the analysis on internalized racism, because whiteness is seen by blacks also, especially the middle class colored blacks, that whiteness is associated with beauty, cleanliness, innocence, goodness, and decency. Now, if you take a very poor family, or a very poor girl, to center on Peccola, who has a dysfunctional family, a father who is constantly drunk, a mother who works for whites, and treats with the black girl, the white girl that she takes care of, with a kind of love that she never shows her own daughter. And so it is impossible. They live in a rundown house. They are absolutely poor. They are certain that they are ugly. This is that's why I speak of internalized racism. She says in a certain passage, it is as if a god or some deity had told them, "You are ugly." And they had said, "Yes, you are right." And they took the ugliness in their hands, threw it as a mantle over them, and went about the world with it. That is, they were convinced that they were ugly. This act of wearing one's own ugliness is typical of the very poor blacks that appear. For the blacks, the blacks who have internalized white culture, they see niggers, as the novel itself says, they associate them with criminality, laziness, and immorality. Now, when you are so very poor, when you have nothing to win, nothing to lose, it's very difficult to be not only beautiful, very difficult to be clean, to be decent, to have money for your needs. Bueno, I don't know, we will not, I don't want to add something, but what is very interesting is the technique with which the novel was written. If we have time, I will refer to it later. Then the next one is Song of Solomon. And Song of Solomon, the setting, the time setting goes from the 1930s to the 1960s, because it covers more or less the lifespan of the main character, who is Milkman dead. There are flashbacks to earlier times, even to slavery, because Milkman was to learn the story of his family and to find out who he is, who he himself is. No? He wants to find, but he doesn't know when he starts on his journey in search of identity, he doesn't know that he's looking for his own identity. But this is what what he does. As usual, racism keeps its centrality, but this time it hinges on identity. And the topic of identity appears very early in the novel, when Milkman, already a young man, asks his father about his father's father, that is about Milkman's grandfather. And he says, "Your father was a slave?" What kind of question is that? Of course he was. Who hadn't been in 1869? And then he tells a very amusing story. And because Milkman asked him how his father got his name, which was Malcolm Dead. And he said that he had, as all slaves, he had to register, or as all blacks, he had to register. And the man who had to fill out the form was drunk. So he wrote all the information in different places, in the wrong places. So finally he came out with the name of Malcolm Dead, no? Born in Dumfries, which had nothing to do with he himself. How we read this, of course it is a funny episode, but what is left of the identity of this man who went to register? Nothing. It's pure nothingness. No? Malcolm Dead, born in a place that does not exist, or at least they didn't know of its existence. Nothing. And to this nothingness, we should add the nothingness, the original nothingness. Because when slaves came to America, they lost their names, the names of their tribes, the names of their family, and their language. Many a time, if that was possible, the slave owners mixed up tribesmen, that is, the people who belong to different ethnic groups, so that they couldn't understand each other. They couldn't understand one another. They didn't speak the same language. So nothing is left of the original identity of these people. So no wonder that this boy, without knowing all this, sets out on looking for his identity. Bueno, there is no specific retelling of slavery, but there are events that always take us back to the original crime, let's say, that is slavery. There are historical events like the parade on Armistice Day. Is this one that you? No, that's a. See it is? Yes, this no, this is another. They may read it there. There is a reference to Armistice Day, and also a very important one, which is the assassination of a 14-year-old boy that in 1955. His name was Emmett Till. His name went all over the world, and there were movements against very much uproar because of his killing. He had been. He came from Chicago. He went to the South to visit his. I think it was his mother's family, and he was killed, thrown into the river Tallahatchie. I think we are in Mississippi State, and his body appeared mutilated and disfigured. Why it became so famous all over the world? Because his mother, insisted on having, when he took the body back to Chicago, on having a public funeral with the casket open, so that everybody could see what white men in the South had done to her child. And there were 50,000 people that went to the funeral. I remember even that there is a poem by the black Cuban poet Nicolás Guillén that begins, en Norteamérica la rosa de los vientos tiene el pétalo sur rojo de sangre. Y el título es Elegía a Emmett Till, because the case became famous. And it is interesting because this is August 1955. If we remember something of history, in December, the famous case of Rosa Parks, the black seamstress who refused to give her bus seat to a white man. No? And so the blacks in the South started a boycott against the bus in Montgomery, which lasted a whole year, a bit more, a year and some days. And this is the beginning of the civil rights movement. That's why it is also important that it is mentioned here in this novel. Bueno, let me see. Milkman has a very close friend who is Guitar. And Guitar has very extreme views as regards the racial conflict. No? And so they have very serious discussions. These angry discussions or arguments with Guitar, the story is that his aunt Pilot tells him certain things that he learns about the story of his father and his mother, etc. Plus a story that his aunt tells him about some gold in a cave, decide him to go in search of his family. First of the gold, but then it becomes a search for his father's family. This is interesting because this part is based on a very old legend, black legend. The journey takes him to different places until he gets to Virginia. There he finds out, after a long pilgrimage and questions asked to many people, he discovers that, or he learns that his grandfather, the one who was given the name Mako Dead, his real name was Jake, and that he had been the youngest of 21 children, the children of his grandparents. No, his great grandfather was his name was Solomon, and his wife was Raina. This idea of Solomon could fly. This is the legend, that there were blacks who could fly. And so in Virginia there was a rock that was called or named Solomon's Rock, because it was said that Solomon leapt from this rock and went away. And there is a gulch that is called Raina's Gulch, because her sobs and her moaning is constantly heard, because she was left behind with 21 children. This story of Solomon flying away is that is Solomon is one of the many blacks that are said to have gone away to freedom or to Africa. I suppose that the strength of a legend like this is precisely because it is the legend of people who could go away. No? And so it was a dear story for those who wanted to go back or wanted to go to freedom and couldn't do it. What I would say is that there are Negro spirituals that refer to this, no? To the possibility of flying away, flying to freedom. Some of them very well known, like Go Down Moses or Swing Low to Chariot. Well, those refer to this. I found out also that there is a story that apparently, there is an event that apparently is historical that took place in 1803 when a group of black slaves that belonged to the Igbo or Igbo ethnic group, that they are from Nigeria, came to the shores of Georgia, and when they descended from the ship, they went to the shore, and they turned their back to the land and went back again, into the water again. Many of them drowned. That's why some people say that this is the first freedom march. No, they going into the sea and drowning. But the legend says that some of them were turned into buzzards and could fly away to Africa again. And they also said that while they were going into the sea, they were singing, "The water spirit brought us, the water spirit will take us back." Bueno, whether they turned into buzzards and flew away, I don't know, but that they believed, and I suppose that it was necessary, deeply necessary to believe that, bueno, I cannot do it, but perhaps there are people of my race that can do it, that have done it. Bueno, and I will finish with this, with something that Morrison says. The one thing you say about a myth is that there is some truth in there, no matter how bizarre they may seem. And I agree with her. There is always some truth in the myth. Bueno, and then we come to the last one, no? Okay. Which is Tar Baby. Tar Baby was written or published in 1981, and it is the time setting of the story is contemporary to the writing, and it is the first Morrison's novels that was not well received, because precisely it deals with the clash between two opposite views of what it means to be black in the United States. Indeed, we could sum these two views by saying that one view is that of the civil rights. We have to do all we can to show that we are good citizens, that we can be good doctors, good lawyers, whatever, that we are good people. That is, to a certain extent, it is to adapt to the demands of a certain culture. The other, which does not reject this idea of improvement, personal improvement, but at the same time, they want to be black. Remember that one of the one famous sentence or saying was, "Black is beautiful." Do you remember how in the African look or the Afro look in hairstyle that was so popular at certain years? Well, this had to do with black power. Black power is one who maintained that black is beautiful. I want to be black. And this is the conflict. This is the racial conflict here. Apparently, when we start reading it, if it had had a happy ending, it would have been a wonderful romance, because the two persons who fall in love are beautiful people, gorgeous people. They love each other passionately, or perhaps they are simply infatuated with one another, but passionately. And the scenery is one of the many Caribbean islands. Of course, the name of the island is fictitious, no? The Isle de Chevalier. But unluckily, there is no happy ending. No, we'll live forever, happy forever after. The names of these two characters are Jade, the woman, and Son, the young man. And at the end, they go different ways because both are blacks with opposite views of what it means to be black. Well, what I said. And again, as in the Blue Sky, the racial conflict within the black community. To begin with, between the two lovers. Then between American blacks and native blacks. Native blacks, which in the island are Dominican or Haitian. Then conflict between the black servants and their white masters, and between the black servants who are docile and those blacks who are not docile, who are not prone to docility, like Son, the young man, or like the native blacks. Well, and the tensions are deep and complicated, and more complicated when they are brought together with the question of identity, and they weave a close net, and none of the characters can escape this net. So, the suitability of the title, Tar Baby. Tar Baby is a traditional American story. That these stories were collected by a white journalist, Joel Chandler Harris, and were published in 1881. And this story is, the characters in the stories are Brother Rabbit and Brother Fox. Como el correcaminos y what's the... more or less like this. Bird, Rabbit, and Bird, Fox. Brother Fox is tired of Brother Rabbit's tricks, and so he makes a doll out of tar and leaves it on the road. When Brother Rabbit passes by, he greets the doll, but the doll does not answer. So he gets angry and begins to hit and pinch and punch the doll. And the more he does it, the more stuck he gets, because it is tar. So he gets stuck. I don't know how he gets free after that, but this is what happens to Son, and when he meets this Tar Baby, represented by Jadine. Besides, Tar Baby has has deep racist connotation, because it is an expression used by whites to refer to black children. Deprecatingly, of course, disparaging. Bueno, and the range, I will not, I want to finish soon because I want to speak of something else. The racial tensions are linked to individual conflicts of identity and authenticity. Jadine, at a certain moment in the story, remembers or thinks of the white man. Oh, I forgot, I want to add. She has come to the island to see her family, because she lives in Paris. She has studied at the Sorbonne. She's black, of course. She has studied at the Sorbonne, and she has been modeling in Paris. And then she thinks of the man she would like to marry, and the young man, French, of course, and white, that wants to marry her. But at a certain moment she says, she wonders if the person he wants to marry is me or a black girl. Sometimes I want to get out of my skin and be only the person inside. Not American, not black, just me. This is, of course, a conflict of identity and a conflict of authenticity. Who are you? Who am I? Why do I want? Don't I want to be American, or don't want to be black? If I lose this, or if I leave aside this identity, who am I? That's the question that she should ask herself. And it is not a very old question, because I recommended Patricia to buy a novel by a British black writer, Assembly, who has exactly the same problem. And the novel was written last year, so 40 years later. Bueno, the other side of the problem of identity is precisely authenticity. That is, what is the face that you are going to show the world? It is your real face. Jardine, again, is the one who has doubts. He wants to be black, and he wants to live in a black community, and he wants to live near his family. So he has no troubles in that sense. She is the one who has troubles. And then there is an image that comes to her mind very often, sometimes as a dream and sometimes as a memory. She is one day in Paris. She is at a supermarket in Paris, and she is very pleased with herself because she had been chosen for the cover of Elle magazine. And so she wants to give, she has invited several friends to have dinner at her place. So she's buying delicatessen for the dinner at the supermarket. And this is what the novel tells us. The vision itself, then she says, all of them see a woman, a black woman dressed in yellow. And so the story says, the vision itself was a woman much too tall, too much hip, too much bust. The agency would laugh her out of the lobby. So why was she and everybody transfixed? The height, the skin like tar against the canary yellow dress. The woman walked down the aisle as though her many-colored sandals were pressing gold tracks on the floor. She would deny it now, that is Jardine, would deny it now, but along with everybody else in the market, Jardine gasped. Before that woman's woman, that mother, sister, she, that unphotographable beauty took it all away. Indeed, it's a regal image, of a black woman. Her dinner that night or that evening is a success, but then she is alone in her place, and the image of this woman returns, and the novel says that she feels lonely and inauthentic. Bueno, no conflict is solved in this novel, and so the best the whites and blacks, white characters and black characters can do is to accept that conflicts are not solved. And this is the last of the novels that I was going to deal with. But I want to add something to the endings of this novel. In literature, and those who have, there are people who know me and who have heard me say this, when we analyze narrative, whether short or long, we think of narrative as going through three different stages while the narrative flows. First, there is a placement. In the placement, which may be 3 lines, 3 pages, or 3 chapters long, it doesn't matter, we learn who the characters are, who the protagonists are, and what the conflict is. Because without conflict, there is no literature, no narrative, no interest in turning the pages. Then there are certain movements along which the novel, the conflict complicates and moves to the end, and these are called displacements. At the end, we come across what we call in literary terms the replacement. That is, the same character, because if they have died, that's a different story. The same character, at least the protagonist, perhaps the same place and the same time, which is not obligatory, and a solution to the conflict. If the conflict that has been presented at the beginning is solved, then we say that the novel closes, that there is a closure, that the conflict is solved, so nothing else could be said. But but there are many novels, especially contemporary novels, that do not solve conflicts, that simply come to an end. Then we speak of an ending. Why? Because the characters cannot solve the conflicts. And literature has no obligation to solve the conflict. The conflicts in general, when they cannot be solved, it's because they go beyond what is personal. It must be society the one who solves these conflicts. And this is the case of the 5 novels at least that we've been dealing with. None of them comes to an end. All of them come to an end. None of them closes, because no conflict is solved. In Beloved, for those who will read the novels later, I want to tell you this beforehand. In Beloved, there are 2 endings. One is between a conversation between the 2 characters, CD and Paul D. He is very tender, and he tells CD, you are your best thing. But this part ends with the female character saying, me. And you don't know whether it is out of perplexity because she does not believe what he's saying, because she doesn't want the story to go on. So the question is no closure. And the last word in the story, in which there is we come across the figure of the ghost again, or the figure of Beloved. The last the last word in the novel is Beloved. And Beloved is the word that is engraved on a tomb. So it means dead. It means death. Death is no closure. If a person dies, life ends. But all the conflicts that the person may have had remain. Because death, as well as madness, that is mentioned several times in all the stories, do not solve any conflict in literature or in real life. Or rather, they solve no conflict in real life. That's why they cannot solve conflicts in literature. In jazz, there is also a very tender ending, because the novel says, look where their hands are. No, Violet, I think, Violet on Joe's hand, or vice versa. But what deprived them of this intimacy is very much in the past. It is in their past. The origin of the impossibility of being so intimate with one another, at least for a time, comes from the past. And besides, and this is a warning, there is a period before the last word, now. So, look where their hands are, period. Now, when we read literature, we must be very careful when trying to understand even the punctuation marks or the breaks in the lines, because they are pauses. And in this case, it doesn't say, look where their hands are now. No, look where their hands are now. Later, we don't know. So, again, an ending, but without a closure. That's jazz. And in the Blue Sky, I told you, the girl doesn't get, of course, her blue eyes, though she believes she has blue eyes, and she goes mad. Madness, again, is no closure. You simply go mad and your life ends. What conflict is solved there? It is Claudia, the one who says, we acquiesce and say the victim had no right to live. We are wrong, of course, but it doesn't matter. It's too late. It's much, much too late. The time to solve conflicts lies in the past, and the past is over, and so there's no possibility of ending. Bueno, Song of Solomon is very puzzling because guitar, what we know for certain is that guitar shoots Milkman. But we don't know whether he shoots Milkman because he wants to kill him, because the one who gets the shot is Milkman's aunt, Pilot, and she dies. Apparently, we don't know whether Milkman jumps and flies or stays there. We don't know whether the Pilot also flies away together with a bird that has taken a small box with her name inside. There are all questions that we ask. We don't know how the story really, it ends here with nothing solved, nothing said for certain. And in Tar Baby, Son is finally, that's the last scene in the novel, is landed on the far side of Isle de Chevalier, in the midst of a very, very thick fog. So he gropes his way, his idea is to get to the white man's mansion to see if Jardine is there. Jardine has already gone away to Paris, but we don't know whether neither we nor Son himself, we don't know whether he is on the right path, whether he has got free from his Tar Baby, whether he has come back to retrieve her Tar Baby, or to say we don't have anything to do any longer. And so again, too many questions. And the last words in the story are the onomatopoeia of the steps of a rabbit, of Brother Rabbit in the original story. Yes, lickety split, lickety split, lickety split. Those are the last words in the story. Is that a closure? No, it is not. So you see that literature does not close what we human beings cannot close in society. Bueno, and I hope you will be interested in reading. Besides this topic, Toni Morrison deals with many other topics. Many of them are universal. Bueno, suffering is also a universal topic, no? And she writes marvelously. Most of there are many passages in her books that are lyrical, that sounds like poem. So I would like you to read some of them. They are difficult in this, not because of the language. The language has a rhythm that is easy to follow. I think that it is precisely the rhythm of the novel, the ones that helps us go on reading. Sometimes they are heavy to put up with, because there is much suffering in all her novels. But I advise you to read them. And now, thank you very much for being so good listeners.